In this video, we'll look at the truth about the Trump presidency. As Donald Trump runs for a second term, it's important to revisit his presidential record and remember his administration's most notable milestones, starting with his economic performance. Despite promising to bring back manufacturing jobs, the U.S. lost 154,000 factory jobs during Trump's tenure, and the share of private sector employees working in manufacturing fell below 10% for the first time since the government started tracking the data in 1939. In fact, Trump had the worst jobs record of any president on record, with more than 3 million jobs lost. Even prior to the pandemic, job growth under Trump ran about 3%, less than under Barack Obama. Joe Biden's presidency saw an increase of 6 million jobs, and the economy is nearly 10% larger under Biden than at Trump's pre-pandemic peak. Before COVID, average incomes had fallen under Trump by over $1,000 per household. For those earning less than $250,000 a year, their income was greater in 2016 during Obama's last year in office than in 2019 under Trump. Under Biden, wage gains have finally exceeded that of inflation, due in large part to the administration's pro-labor policies. The Trump administration, however, pursued policies that only benefited the wealthy and corporations, like the massive Trump tax cuts, which rolled back the taxes of billionaires to the 1910s so that they paid less than school teachers, factory workers, and retirees. Trump also reduced the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, and he forgave a significant portion of unpaid taxes that multinationals had been hiding in tax shelters since the 1980s. As a result, the tax burden to fund the government shifted from companies to the working class, who are now responsible for 86% of federal revenue. This giveaway to the wealthiest Americans added $2.3 trillion to the national debt, creating more debt than any non-wartime president in U.S. history. Trump's tax cuts cost the U.S. government more than Biden's infrastructure bill, Inflation Reduction Act, American Rescue Plan, CHIPS, PACT, student debt forgiveness, and funding the IRS combined. Despite claiming to drain the swamp, Trump appointed the most unqualified cabinet in U.S. history, with cronies intent on dismantling the very agencies they were tasked to run. In all, some 45 individuals from the Trump administration, campaign, and organization have been criminally indicted, racking up a staggering 335 criminal charges so far. Trump advisor Roger Stone was convicted on 7 counts of lying to Congress, obstruction, and witness tampering. Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort pleaded guilty to violating lobbying laws and witness tampering. National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, Trump lawyer Michael Cohen, and campaign aide George Papadopoulos pleaded guilty to lying to authorities. Trump campaign deputy chair Rick Gates pleaded guilty to conspiracy. Trump CFO Alan Weiselberg was found guilty of tax fraud and perjury. Trump election lawyers Sidney Powell, Kenneth Chesebro, and Jenna Ellis pleaded guilty to interfering in the 2020 election. And there's the January 6 insurrectionists. Over 1,230 Trump supporters have been charged, 730 pleaded guilty, and 170 have been convicted so far. And there's Trump himself, now a convicted felon. He faces 88 criminal charges since leaving office, and has been found guilty of 34 for paying hush money to a porn star to influence the 2016 election. He was fined $355 million for fraud in a civil suit and prohibited from serving as an officer or director of any New York corporation for 3 years. He was fined over $88 million in 2 defamation cases against a former model he was found guilty of raping. He had to pay $25 million to defrauded students for the now defunct Trump University. And he was ordered to pay $2 million in damages to 8 different charities for misusing charitable funds. And he had to shut down the Trump Foundation for misconduct. But Trump's lawsuits didn't start with politics. He racked up more than 4,000 lawsuits before even taking office. Trump is the first American president to face a criminal trial, a federal indictment for retaining and concealing classified documents, and a state or federal indictment for trying to overturn an election. He's the only president to be impeached twice and the first to be impeached on national security grounds, even though he's committed a multitude of impeachable offenses, including but not limited to violating the Emoluments Clause, obstruction of justice, ordering unconstitutional imprisonment of migrant families, abusing the pardon power, high crimes and misdemeanors, conspiracy against the U.S., and conspiracy to illegally influence the 2016 election. Trump leaked classified intelligence to Kremlin agents in the Oval Office in May 2017, and he refused to hand over the more than 300 classified documents he kept illegally at Mar-a-Lago, which may be linked to the troubling increase in the arrests and killings of CIA informants in 2021. By comparison, Joe Biden's 4 years as president, 8 years as VP, and 36 years in the Senate have resulted in 0 investigations, indictments, or convictions. Ditto for Barack Obama. And let's not forget the mismanagement of COVID-19, which probably should have been criminal. In 2018, Trump disbanded the National Security Council's Global Health Security and Biodefense Unit that had been created by the Obama administration in preparation for a deadly pandemic. And he ignored the 69-page handbook on how to respond to such a crisis. When Trump was first alerted to the coronavirus outbreak in 2019, he simply chose to ignore it. Once it became unavoidable in 2020, he treated the national health crisis like a public relations crisis, ignoring and refuting the recommendations of health experts and suggesting people should take horse dewormer, which led to a 245% increase in calls to poison control, or drink bleach, which led to a 121% increase in accidental poisonings from household disinfectants. The U.S. had more COVID deaths per capita than any large population, high-income nation, and second only to India. Because of Trump and his lackeys' anti-vaccine rhetoric, some 40% of the deaths occurred after vaccines were available, which means that 180,000 to 235,000 Americans died because they refused COVID-19 vaccinations, the majority of which were in counties that voted overwhelmingly for Trump in 2020. The death rate in these counties was as much as 5 times higher than counties that voted for Biden. In total, over 1.1 million Americans died of COVID, nearly double the number of Americans who died of the Spanish flu in 1918. Trump, however, began harming Americans long before the coronavirus. Beginning in 2015, when he entered politics, psychologists documented an increase in schoolyard bullying caused by Trump's rhetoric. They called it the Trump effect. Soon, the term expanded to include religious and racial bullying by adults, which led to an increase in hate crimes not seen in generations. In cities where Trump held rallies, hate crimes increased by a whopping 226%. White supremacists were so emboldened by his 2016 victory that in the 10 days after the election, there were 867 hate incidents that invoked his name.